Well, that slot is a sun slot. It marks the sun of midwinter. The moon sometimes gets in that slot. When it does, an eclipse will take place. That's the great trilithon. The side companion has fallen down and with it the top, so there's only one sarsen stone left standing. That trilithon marks the midwinter sunset.
If the 30 pillars simply were a method of counting the days, what's the reason for the number of 56 holes on the outer perimeter?
Well, that's a very complicated question. The 56 is an eclipse cycle. Every 56 years, we're back in phase with this cycle. And it's my contention that nobody else can explain why there are 56, and it must be that they were counting year by year the years when the eclipse would take place.
In other parts of the world, 4,000 years ago, were they at the same level mathematically and astronomically as the people here at Stonehenge?
Oh, the British public would be pleased to hear that the ancient Britain was way ahead of the Babylonian in astronomical knowledge, at least 1,000 to 1,500 years. And the Babylonians invented mathematics and could write, but they didn't develop their astronomy until about 500 BC.
The timetable of human knowledge thrown 1,000 years off. If you want to shake the scientific community, that statement will do it.
Personally, I find this very hard to agree with. I'm sure he's right that they could have been used in this way, but this isn't really the point. The point is, were they used in this way? And this means taking into account what we know of the people who built the first Stonehenge, of which these 56 Aubrey holes in a circle are a part. They were not the sort of people who were capable of thinking out something pretty complex of this kind. After all, the lifespan of these people was a great deal shorter than our own. It's very doubtful whether, on the average, anyone would live long enough to observe even one complete cycle. And clearly you must observe and record several cycles before you can be sure that there's a cycle at all.
A Stone Age man would certainly live long enough to see and observe an 18-year cycle. And he would memorize these things as they took place. And by passing them on by word of mouth, an accumulation of knowledge could build up which would be adequate for understanding the complicated movements of the moon. How would they do it? Sagas, poems, Homeric epics, of course, are the first things that come to mind. Writing is an apparently recent invention, and when it began to appear amongst the Greek scholars, knowledge was written in books. A few scholars objected to this vulgarization of their knowledge, and the idea of conserving facts in your mind and transmitting them verbally was a very well-known method and a very popular one in the ancient world.
The Aubrey holes belong to the first Stonehenge. The contact with Greece and with higher and more sophisticated, more scientific civilizations comes only hundreds of years later, when the Aubrey holes, I think, were completely grown over and probably didn't show on the surface at all.
They didn't have to get the information from outside. In fact, that information just didn't exist. What was going on at Stonehenge was 1,000 years ahead of its time.
There are simply 56 holes in the ground, equally spaced in a circle, about 16 feet apart, and this is important, I think, for Professor Hawkins's theory, they were filled up almost as soon as they'd been dug. Now, he suggests that these were used as markers in a kind of computer over a long period of time. And my objection to this, it's a purely practical one, is that if you want to set out 56 marks on the ground, it isn't the best way of doing it to dig a lot of holes and then fill them up again.
It was a very sensible way of marking these holes. The archaeologists today have dug out the Aubrey holes and rammed the chalk back in place. Result? Nothing grows there. We have a beautiful white spot, a permanent, indelible mark.
Two men committed to 2 points of view, but the rest of the scientific world was reacting to Hawkins's theory, and we sought out some of the experts. When you want an expert on astronomy, you go to the Royal Greenwich Observatory. In the 3 centuries since Charles II founded it, some of the most important discoveries in modern science have come from here. Astronomer Harold Richards.
There is no doubt of the astronomical significance of Stonehenge. Professor Hawkins, however, seems to be concerned to prove that the 56 Aubrey holes constitute an eclipse predictor. And there is, I think, no proof that such a 56-year cycle does indeed exist.
The 56-year cycle was not known to astronomers up until this point. I found it from my Stonehenge work. The 56-year cycle depends on the seasons of the year. The Stonehenges were very interested in seasonal eclipses. Modern-day astronomers have not been. That's the reason that they missed this 56-year cycle.
I do have one or two uneasy doubts about it. But it always seemed to me that if the builders of Stonehenge knew enough to build an accurate computer of this kind, they would also have known enough to be able to predict eclipses and other phenomena without recourse to building rather large and cumbersome monuments of this kind.
There's an easier way to do most things that are spectacular.